Dear sisters and brothers, dear friends, thank you for being here to this workshop. As you know, its theme is Latitudinarism, a theology for the 21st century. To understand the meaning of this title, we need some premises. We all know we live in dark times, times when ancient ghosts of division, selfishness, and racism are being resurrected. You probably heard and will hear these all along these 4 days. Coming from a European country where, for many reasons, this involution process is particularly strong, I'm very worried by its social and spiritual effects, and I'm sure I share with you the conviction that nobody can remain indifferent in front of it. And in fact, in front of this catastrophe of the concept of humanity, we, as you, tend to raise barriers, and one of these barriers is made of one of the strong points of our faith, the concept of tolerance. It is exactly this concept the starting point for my meditation. You know, tolerance is a strange, double-bladed thing. On one side, it can be too much. It poses hard questions about its limits. An example, questions related to how much we can and must tolerate intolerance, and to the borders between tolerance and quiescence. Karl Popper, in his The Open Society and Its Enemies, wrote, "Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If you extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and tolerance with them." And in fact, the so-called paradox of tolerance is discussed in many of our churches. On the other side, it can be not enough and partial, a step in the journey, but not a final goal. As a Unitarian Universalist, I believe I own just one truth: to own no certain truth. I'm very convinced of this, and, even if I were not, my parishioners would surely remind me of this certitude. So mine is just a debatable point of view, and it is under this point of view that I take side towards the second position. To me, tolerance shows to have two fundamentally inherent problems: quiescence and paternalism. If we think about it, tolerance often sounds like, "I'm trying not to lash out, even though deep down I want to." We pride ourselves and our society on our ability to tolerate one another, but all we are laying claim to is our self-control. Our society's reluctance to deteriorate to an animalistic form in which we act on emotional drives, and while we do it, we feel so superior as we know we are right and the other is wrong. The other, the one with different ideas, is like a child whose noises are annoying, but ought to be borne because of his young age, or, in our case, of his intellectual or moral or religious inferiority, or because we don't want to have trouble with his parents, or to be socially blamed for our lack of patience. Yet, in this picture, tolerance, as an idea and an ethic, obscures the interaction between individuals and groups on both a daily basis and over the long durée. The mutually reinforcing exchange of culture and ideas between groups in a society is missing in the idea of tolerance. Meaningfully, Goethe wrote that to tolerate is to insult, and socially speaking, just tolerating can easily be the first brick of the walls creating an apartheid society in which each single group or set of beliefs lives on its own, without any contact with other dissenting instances. I am an historian, and for professional habits, I always tend to look back to history to understand how much a problem is rooted in our past. In trying to retrace the track of tolerance, I can't but find validation of the constant presence of quiescence and paternalism. Since the first appearance of the theme in the 13th century, with Marsilius of Padua, Defensor Pacis, and then with Erasmus, or with the Hereticis Ancint Persequendi by Castellan, the position is always the same. I don't try to understand you and to meditate on your position. I simply consider other values predominant compared to a violent fighting against heresy and not suitable to achieve my goals. Then, in the 17th and 18th centuries, the idea of tolerance moves to more political sensibilities. With Jean Bodin and his religious Arianism, tolerance is just an instrumentum regni. The Epistola de Tolerantia by John Locke is simply an assessment of the convenience of the separation between state laws and religious laws. And 1 century later, the Treatise on Tolerance by Voltaire is nothing but a condemnation of fanaticism in the name of rationality, peaceful coexistence, and charity. The same elements that will characterize the theme in the following centuries. Convenience, charity, rationality of coexistence. That's it. I want to be clear. Obviously, I'm not blaming any of these concepts. They are fundamental steps for humanity. Actually, by what appears, still waiting to be accepted by too many. They were incredible advancements in the moments of their formulations. And they should be a basic, elementary patrimony for every human being. What I'm saying is that I see no spiritual growth for us in their obvious acceptance. In assuming tolerance as a lifestyle, we are doing something rational, something surely good for us and for our neighbors, but we are not getting out of our area of comfort. Remain in the jail of our set of beliefs and let the others remain in theirs, with wall between the cells, with no attempts of discussion, of learning from the other, or looking for a synthesis taking us forward. So, perhaps, we might overtake the concept of tolerance and move towards a broader idea of a common ground, of a pluralism constantly looking for a deeper unity, standing at the root of our common existence through a productive dialogue among different instances. A dialogue which doesn't deny the possibility of different paths, but transcends singular or collective positions to question us all about the core of being spiritual entities together. In this frame, the question which immediately arises is, wouldn't this mean to overtake as first the meaning of notions like the ones of religion and therefore of church? The answer to this question is, in my opinion, double-edged. If we consider a church as a congregation of people, it's hard to say we don't need it. Surely any form of spirituality has two different sides, a personal one and one which lives in and of communication. Every human being as is or our own set of beliefs coming from individual experiences of formation and life, different ways of thinking and of facing events, different mental elaborations, critical capabilities and goals. The problem of these individual inner lives is that they risk to be, in a way, solipsistic and therefore static, a sort of spiritual onanism which indefinitely perpetuates itself. Here is where we need the second aspect of spirituality, the communicative one. We must be ready to frankly discuss our beliefs. We must be open in listening to criticisms, questionings, doubts. We must leave room to other people's experiences and ideas that can partially complete ours or challenge them, sometimes improving them, always putting them to test. All this process can't be performed on our own. It needs the other, the neighbor, the touchstone, finally, the community. But communication is not imposition. Communication is not uniformity, and nobody can seriously affirm that a spiritual community, a congregation, must be forcibly formed just by like-minded people, just by mere executors of orders and dogmas, coming from other members, and allegedly from a higher source, all having the same ideas and the same beliefs. And unfortunately, the common traditional understanding of the term church is exactly this one. A church as a denomination with its own fixed set of values, ideas and beliefs, which is incarnated in a bunch of communities or congregations of believers following them, which perfectly fits the general concept of religion. Probably a good extensive definition of religion comes from Peter Mandeville and Paul James, who, in Globalizing Religion, wrote that a religion is a relatively bounded system of beliefs, symbols and practices that addresses the nature of existence, and in which communion with others and otherness is lived as if it both takes in and spiritually transcends socially grounded ontologies of time, space, embodiment, and knowing. The problem is that if we think about it, practically any philosophy or ideology can fit such a definition, but for one element, which looks like being very peculiar, the reference to an otherness as a reference model for the believers. And here we come to a quite big problem, as according to this already quite extensive interpretation, practically speaking, to adhere to a religion means to characterize our life on the basis of a relationship we establish not only with other known subjects, that will be just social relationship, but basically with an otherness whose presence is a fundamental element to define any religious experience. Simply, without the presence of our relation with an otherness, there can be no religion. Therefore, the core trouble stands in the definition of this otherness, which is logically impossible, as any known instance would be outside of the concept of otherness itself. Any otherness is naturally, by definition, something other in respect to whatever we can think about, something unknown to our cognitive skills. So in the moment in which we adhere to any religion, we are ultimately affirming that we are committing our life in terms of moral and practical behavior to an instance that, even given its existence on faith, we will never be able to know, which honestly speaking is absurd. Obviously, we can also believe that a religious experience must forcibly be based on illogicality. As Tertullian wrote, "Credo qui absurdum," I believe as it is absurd. And actually, the theme of the Deus absconditus, a divinity being completely unknown to us, is very common to theology. Just in the context of Christianity, the concept is already present in Isaiah 45, and is rather fundamental in the works of many scholars, from Augustine. "Si comprendes, no as Deus." If you understand him, then he can't be God, he writes in Sermon 52. To Duns Scoto, from Meister Eckhart to Niccolò Cusano, and descending along the line of the so-called negative theology, from Søren Kierkegaard to Rudolf Otto. "Gott ist ganz andere," he writes. And Karl Barth, just to mention some names. While in other religious contexts, we could think about the veil of Maya of the Buddhist tradition, or the sentence, "The Tao of which one can speak is not the eternal Tao," by Lao Tzu, to find the same concept. They all confirm, in a way or the other, the concept of complete otherness of the transcendence, and our necessity to exert what we can call a blind trust as an act of faith. Nonetheless, I deeply doubt our way to face religion is, in the majority of cases, based on such a blind trust. How do we solve the impasse of a necessity of faith which contrasts our human logic? Normally introducing a core concept in all religions, although expressed in different ways from case to case. The one of revelation. What is it stripped down to its starting colors? For some specific reasons, a human being or a bunch of human beings manages to reach a sort of higher level of knowledge of the divine, becoming a prophet, an enlightened, a master or a guru, or in the particular case of Christianity and of some other previous religions, the process is inverted and God becomes a man. The Creator bows down to be acknowledged by the creatures. However it happens, these particular figures manage to give us a glimpse of the essence of the divine, of its will, of its message, and, consequently, of what we are expected to do. Therefore, the otherness becomes a little less otherness, but it is still otherness, as logically the infinity of the divine can't be wholly understood by the finite of the human perspective, in the immeasurable natural distance between the two beings, and as this distance is, as mentioned, necessary for the definition of the concept of divinity itself. This is surely a comfortable solution which, in some respects, saves the radical otherness of the transcendent and the human need to commit to an at least partially known instance. Unfortunately, both theoretically and historically speaking, also this approach doesn't look like being immune to possible criticisms. On the theoretical side, I would say that the most problematic element stands in the figure of the prophet. In the Christianity, we have a God coming on earth to reveal his nature. Why should a God pass this communication through the words of an incarnation into a human being? Why not to speak directly to the humans as a God? As the element of free will of the human being would have been lost, as this direct communication would have meant a sort of state of necessity for the humans? But given that any form of intervention by an immanent divinity is a form of interference in the free will, what is stated here is that a God preferred a smaller level of interference directed to just a group to a larger interference directed to everybody. And this not to mention other paradoxical amenities, like God saving a humanity created by Him from a sin which is naturally inherent to that humanity, and therefore also created by Him, by sacrificing Himself as an scapegoat to Himself. By the way, much more common is the idea of a human prophet disclosing the divine will, which is the nature of his enlightenment, partly closing the gap between the human nature and the divine total otherness. I think a couple of questions arise. First of all, how is this special human being chosen? Randomly, since the beginning of times, for his own merits, for his own capabilities? Naturally, being any answer to this question impossible, all answers are virtually true and false and therefore irrelevant. All of them show some bias in a way or the other. A random choice would mean that the human acting is, at the end of the day, absolutely irrelevant. A choice made by God since the beginning of times would mean that God created a human being superior to all others. Someone being no more just a human being, but a sort of demigod, in contrast with any supposed uniqueness of the divine and the supposed fairness of the divine towards all its creatures. If we consider the possibility to become a prophet as a human conquest by someone created so strong to resist to temptation, to the point of becoming consonant to the will of God, why not everybody? And if the divine gives to everybody without distinction the possibility to enter in the state of consonance with its will, and just some decide to get engaged through studies, meditations, whatever else in the process, this arises a big question related to the God-humans gap. Are the divinity and the humans radically different in terms of natural quality? Simply they are made of completely different matter, or in terms of quantity of any attribute, knowledge, lifespan, power, or whatever else. In the first case, nothing could ever cover any length of the gap between two non-matchable entities, while in the second case, we should imagine a human being who, thanks to his work, can virtually cover the gap between humanity and divinity, meaning that all human beings could virtually and potentially be gods. Let's move to the historical examples of revelation. Generally speaking, we receive just second-hand revelations. Reports of deeds and claims related to a certain prophet, master, guru, messiah, or whatever else, disclosing some truth about the divine in books forming the so-called Holy Scriptures. As a consequence, our revealed religions are based on the reading and interpretation of these holy books, which theoretically should direct us to the same divine will. But apart from some peculiar recurring elements, are all different one from the other. Common explanation: all are wrong or incomplete, but for one, obviously the one of my religion. Actually, this is just an act of faith proved by nothing, and with the same credibility, and perhaps, respecting the rules of Occam's razor a little more, one could as well claim that they are all false. If we turn to philology, we all know that the formation of the so-called canons is something very arbitrary. In Judaism, the Torah, normally assigned to Moses, is considered to be a centuries-long work of mixture of at least 4 different priestly school texts. The Christian evangelic books, even forgetting the hundreds of variations we received, are nothing but partial reports of previous oral accounts interpreted by a specific winning party after the Council of Jerusalem, years after the events. In Hinduism, the Vedas are different in relation to different tribes and castes, and in Buddhism, both the canon and its interpretation vary according to different schools and monastic orders. So finally, what are all these so revealing holy books, if not partial and sided accounts coming from different oral traditions? As Stanley Sadner puts it, what we have is nothing but unsure shadows of a human supposition about the divine will, manipulated by other human beings, normally for their own social, political, ethnic, or group purposes, and traded on being a stringent, normative godly will, while we never knew, we don't know, and very probably will never know anything about the hazy concept we define as transcendence and about its will. Nevertheless, the quest for the divine looks like being a theme that has accompanied the whole history of the mankind. Why? Possibly the need of an explanation to quell our fears and uncertainties in front of a mysterious world made us dream about the existence of a superior entity giving a sort of order, though unknown to us, to the surrounding chaos. And it's not so surprising that the more we have become able to give physical and scientific reasons to whatever was happening, the less the need for a divinity has become urgent. The problem is that no invention, no discovery, no knowledge related to the way nature works ever managed to answer to some core questions which remain central in the human existence. Questions related to the meaning of our life, to its origin, to its destiny. If we could also come to the intellectual conclusion that any metaphysical level is just a product of our mind, of our fears, and of our need for answers, we can't forget that spirituality is not just a rational approach to the problem of God. Spirituality is mainly a feeling we have and an intimate experience. It's a feeling that life is not just a meaningless series of acts aiming to prolong our self-preservation and to perpetuate our species in a nonsense, self-referential loop, but is meant to build something more, something deeper related to our inside, to our moral and social growth. It's the experience of a sort of higher level of conscience we reach in the moment in which we abstract ourselves from the contingent and project our being to look for a state of mind which links us to eternity and eternal presence in the life of humanity. I suppose any attempt to describe this feeling and this experience is destined to fail. It is just something inexpressible, and perhaps it is exactly the ineffability of such an immaterial sensation that caused the myriads of fantasies and human creations aim to try to describe it in human words. Which are the corollaries of this assumption? 1. None can consider himself as the only owner of an absolute truth. 2. It doesn't look like being so reasonable to feel an inner, intimate, deep sensation and to look for the source of this sensation outside of us, in the highest heaven. In this sense, in the Gospel of Didymus Judas Thomas, the author made Jesus' claim, "If those who lead you say to you, 'Look, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It's in the sea,' then the fishes will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you and outside of you." 3. the feeling of the transcendent, or of the experience of the divine are just subjective. If we agree about these conclusions, the following question is it possible to think about religion which is not a jail, which doesn't impose a fixed common path made of rules, rituals and dogmas? As we are here, probably we all know the answer to this question, but I'd like to quote one of the great thinkers of our denomination, Theodore Parker, who wrote, "In actual Christianity, there seem to have been, ever since the time of its early founder, two elements, the one transient, the other permanent. The one is the thought, the folly, the uncertain wisdom, the theological notions, the impiety of man, the other, the eternal truth of God." Though set in a specific Christian environment, what is, in my opinion, fundamental in this claim is that it states an element of variability in religion, which doesn't mean to fall in a mere situationalism, but rather aims to find out what is really substantial in a changing world. What is delineated here is the plausibility of our religious variability, of our religious dynamism, which keeps together eternal truth and different contexts. Well, what Parker did in terms of time, a long history had already been done in terms of space by a quite small religious current called Latitudinarianism. Their vision derived from the 17th century deism of scholars like Robert Burton, Lord Cherbury, or Matthew Tyndale, stating some fundamental points: rejection of religion based on books claiming to contain the revealed Word of God, rejection of religious dogma and demagogy, skepticism of reports of miracles, prophecies, and religious mysteries. One of the most interesting offsprings of deism was precisely Latitudinarianism, created by a group of English theologians, clerics, and academics from the University of Cambridge. They thought that adhering to very specific doctrines, liturgical practices, and church organizational forms was not necessary and could be harmful because the sense that one had special instructions from God made individuals less amenable to moderation and compromise, or to reason itself, as Ned Landsman writes in From Colonials to Provincials. In a way, the attempt of Abbott, Carton, Hall, and the other scholars of the group was to attach no importance to externals and prize practical piety far above all matters of form. What is particularly interesting is the etymology of the name given to the current. Quite clearly, Latitudinarianism comes from latitude, as one of the general concepts of the current was that rituals and theologies were a product of different latitudes, that's to say, of different cultures and environments. Surely their vision was limited just to Christianity and, in particular, to the different theological sensibility present in Anglicanism. But couldn't we extend the same concept to our religions? Couldn't we consider our religions as different approaches, dictated by different cultural, historical, and social backgrounds, to the same unsolvable problem of defining, in terms of human language, a sensation and an experience of the divine? Given that all human beings are equal in terms of biology and possibility to have the same feelings and basic needs, the different answers to the same kind of stimulus, the mentioned experience of something existing beyond us and beyond the pure material world should depend, reasoning in terms of social groups and leaving aside different personal sensibilities, on the different life backgrounds in which each single group grows and is nurtured and educated. According to an undetermined and possibly quite endless number of cultural and social variables, Parker would speak about the transient, the same core experience, the permanent, will be reshaped in a different way, will be expressed in a different way, and therefore will go to form the root of a spirituality which, over time, passing through the experience of other people following that specific expression of spirituality in their own understanding, will give birth to a religion. Therefore, as religions result as totally human varying exposition of an ineffable sensation, and in their being totally human, their variations are somehow or wrong in their failing to give an exact explanation of a complete otherness, and all right in inserting the experience of that otherness in the framework of the culture of a certain historical period and of a certain context. This is basically what makes any form of fundamentalism and fanaticism only the expression of the blindest ignorance, and what makes of any form of bold literalism a nonsense, in the moment in which, in a literal interpretation, I simply focus on a tool used to express a common foundational core message, forgetting that any tool undergoes to an endless number of just human cultural variables. Of course, in this framework, one radical question still stands. Does this core exist or not? Can't we think that this core is just a product of our desires and fears, an attempt to find a meaning to all that we experience? Ludwig Feuerbach, in his The Essence of Christianity, wrote, "The essence of faith is the idea that which man wishes actually is. He wishes to be immortal, therefore is immortal. He wishes for the existence of a being who can do everything which is impossible to nature and reason, therefore such a being exists." It is a deep, almost unsolvable question. How can we discuss about the existence of something so ineffable, of something we can't even define without falling in human categories and fantasies? In a way, even if we think about the most present common element of all religions, the so-called golden rule, about vertical and horizontal love, that's to say about loving our neighbors as a reflection of the divine love, and we think that this love is the proof of the existence of a divine entity, we are still applying human categories to an alleged complete otherness, whose characteristics are totally unknown to us. To say that a divine, transcendent being is loving is more or less like saying that a tree is blonde. The categories don't match. It looks like it is all a matter of faith, and in terms of faith, we come back to a complete subjectivity, which clothes us of Parker's transience, a permanent, we can't even objectify. But are we so sure there is no objectively existing transcendence nobody can deny? In answering to this question, we can find a good help in a sentence by a famous French-Chilean intellectual, Alejandro Jodorowsky, who during an interview said, "If for you God is a concept that is not in every place but is far away, I transform it into vital energy, and we cannot affirm that the vital energy is detached from us, because otherwise we would have died. What supports us? What supports us is here. Now, this vital energy, which the shamans of past centuries called the astral people, If you use it to build, is God. If you use it to destroy, is the devil. But it is the same energy. It depends on how you use it. And this is what I call free will. God, or the devil, is an energy at our disposal. If we use it badly, it is a catastrophe. We are detached. We are out of favor. If we use it well, God is here. Actually, although we rarely think about it, life, the existence of all lives on earth, of that vital energy nobody can well explain, is the most objective presence of an unknown divine. A presence we all, like it or not, are constantly experiencing. I think it is impossible to say whether life is something like an avatar of a god in this world, or is God itself, a divine, very far from the common personalized representation we are used to, but a divine formed by the communion of all lives, of the present and of the past, would say Aldo Capitini, the theologian who invented the Peace March of Assisi, forming the anima mundi of Plato, Schelling, Schopenhauer, Bergson, and partially of Jung and Jacques Dupuy. Once again, this becomes a matter of subjective faith. What we can say is that vital energy life is, in a latitudinarian perspective, probably the closest thing to the divine we can experience. The permanent core around which all religious transients have been culturally built. And the corollaries of this spiritual centrality of life are many. Some examples. If we see life as a transcendent, or as the first visible and objective expression of the transcendent, first, we owe to life and to all lives all the respect, the worship, and the cult possible. Second, all lives participate to the creation of the common divine anima mundi, and therefore any distinction of rank between a life and another is just absurd and specious, mainly if based on social and moral elements, depending only on different cultural backgrounds. Third, at the same time, any life is constitutive of the divine with all its peculiarities, its tracks, and its particular ways of expressing, while the unity of all lives, which is a natural target, stands in tension towards the creation of an harmony of all the parts of the same body. Fourth, as Panikkar constantly underlines in his last writings, reverence for the existence covers everything, any aspect of life and of the existing, and is practically brought on through respect for everything and everyone. Fifth, any act becomes moral or immoral only in the perspective of reverence, respect, and care of any life, constitutive part of the divine or of the element of presence of the divine. And here we do re-evaluate the golden rule, and not depending on transient cultural paradigms. Sixth, in this picture, tolerance, although meritorious, is just a step of acceptance of the different spurious constructions of ways and tools, a step overpassed by the common worship to life in all its aspects. These, as mentioned, are just some examples, and we could go on expressing these corollary elements for ages. But I think I already abused enough of your patience. Thank you for your kind attention.